Hello everybody. Alright, so welcome to another philosophy conversation. So this conversation is going to pick up in Greek philosophy after the execution of Socrates. But we're going to back up to talk about one of Socrates' students. One of Socrates' students. This student's name is Aristocles. So Aristocles, his family had money. So he came from, affluence, so to speak. And it's pretty noteworthy that he had two particular hobbies that history remembers. One is that he wrestled, like the, how Greco-Roman wrestling, I guess it was the Greco part of the Greco-Roman. And so what ends up happening other than wrestling is he also writes poetry. I mean, that's a lovely combination, right? He writes poetry, very interested in poetry writing, but at the same time, he chokes people in his spare. Alright, so Aristocles, part of the reason he had time to do this, choking people and writing poetry, is because, well, his family was rich, and so at the time that meant you had leisure time. And leisure time meant you can do things like, well, poetry, wrestling, as opposed to working, say on a farm or, doing some kind of a trade or something like that. And so, as word has it, one day, Aristocles was going out. We don't know which thing he was going to do. He was either going to write some poetry or choke somebody. And as he's walking through the courtyard square scene, he hears a guy talking, talking to some other men or what have you. And as he listens to that talk, he gets interested and he stops and begins to partake in the conversation, and does not continue his journey on to do the choking or to do the poetry writing. And so, as history says, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into roughly 20 years, where Aristocles, what began as him going out and listening to this teacher, who at first just seemed like some random guy who was sitting outside talking to other young men. And so he listens, he's interested, he's talking about things like reason, things like knowing the truth of yourself. This is stuff that interests Aristocles. And like I said before long, he's no longer choking people and he's no longer writing his poetry. At that point, he's all in, listening to, well, who we already know as Socrates. So we fast forward along. Aristocles was at the trial of Socrates, but he was not at the execution. He couldn't take it. Let's remember that his name, Aristocles, actually means like son of the aristocracy or something like that. And so it marks him off as a part of the group that actually executed Socrates. And as we already have heard, he thought that that was the most unjust thing that could happen. Okay, so what happens then after the execution is Aristocles is disillusioned. He flees, so to speak. He leaves Athens. And, of course, he changes his name. And he takes on the name that he used when he was a wrestler. His wrestling name was Plato, which means the broad, because it said that he had thick shoulders and a thick chest or something like that, and he could choke people out. So Aristocles changes his name to Plato, and then Plato, disillusioned at the execution of his instructor, mentor, father figure, person he thinks taught him the truth. Oh boy, what have we got here? Well, looks like we've got a U-turn coming. Alright, well, I think we're going to make a U-turn out of this. All right, so disillusioned by what the state has done, Plato now wants to make some very particular, philosophic declarations. So the first thing he wants to do is to be able to teach people how to separate knowledge from opinion. Because part of what he thinks is that it was opinions and not having knowledge that got Socrates killed in the first place. And so, number one, teach people how to distinguish the two, because he feels like they were just persuaded by opinions and that they didn't truly know how to think for themselves, and that the rich ruling elite give everybody else their opinions. Imagine that. Alright, so the second thing he wanted to work out, so first we have the separation of knowledge from opinion, and then he also wants to work out how to have a just state. Before he can do those things though, he really has to set out what is reality. What is reality made of? So, in order to begin opening up our discussion of Plato's philosophy proper, we first need to start thinking about a philosophic distinction that really kind of comes into play whenever we begin to look at Plato's work. Two questions. Question number one, the philosophic question, what is it? What is it? Question number two, the philosophic question, how do you know? So here are our two questions. What is it? How do you know? And what we have there are the two divisions of philosophy, metaphysics and epistemology. So metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality, meaning it asks a general question, what is it? While epistemology is the study of the theory of knowledge, or how humans come to know things. And its question is, how do you know? So as we begin to talk about Plato's theories, we're going to talk about them in terms of its metaphysics and its epistemology. What is it saying about the nature of reality? One. And how does he know, or how do we come to know about the nature of reality, or anything for that matter? All right. Now, we're going to center our conversation, our Plato conversation, around three real points of metaphor. One is going to be the allegory of the cave. Two is going to be the simile of the sun. And three is going to be the divided line of knowledge. So, kind of go through those again. Allegory of the cave, the divided line, and the simile of the sun. And in each one of those, we can ask the metaphysical question and we can ask the epistemological question. Let us begin with the allegory of the cave. So the allegory of the cave is in book 7 of the Republic. And in the beginning he opens up by saying, what is the effect of education on the ignorant, or the unenlightened, or those who don't know? And so he says, imagine that you've got a group of people who since birth have been chained up in a cave. They can't look and see around them. All they can see is straight ahead of them. And you just have to imagine, right? I mean, nowadays we got movies that can show these concepts a little better, and we will watch one of those movies. But for now, let's just go with it. So people have been in a cave their whole lives, looking one direction, they're chained there. Behind them, where they cannot see, there's a raised way and a fire behind them. There are also people who are walking in between them and the fire behind them, but they can't see the people and they can't see the fire. What they can see is the projection of the shadows from the fire and the figures behind them. They can see it in front of them. through the shadows. Now this word I'm using, or that we'll be using, shadow, that's not a concept that they understand. They don't understand this concept shadow, because see, shadow implies a bunch of things happening at one time. It implies multi-part process. Namely, there being a light source, there being an object blocking that light source, there being another surface upon which that shadow can be projected, the blocking there of the light, all that. So there are a lot of things. The people who are chained up there, they don't know any of that. Now, there are people walking behind them, kind of like puppeteers, who are holding up objects and whatnot. And what our people can see are the shadows of those objects. And as the people who are holding the objects, I'm going to call them our jailers, as the jailers are walking behind them along the raised way, they're also talking. And as they talk, the people who are chained up, remember, you know, they can't see, but in front of them. So for the people who are chained up, they're seeing the shadows, and they're thinking that the sounds, because of the echo coming from the wall in front of them, they feel like the sounds are coming from the things themselves. And so let's suppose there's a shadow of a dog, a lady with a fruit basket, and some kind of a statue, let's imagine. Well, they don't think of shadow, they think dog. There's the dog, there's the fruit basket, you know, there's the statue, or what have you. And they get those names from the talking of the people walking behind them. All right, so we got the setup, the cave. Now, he says, imagine what will happen if somebody descends into the cave and sets one of them free. And first has one of them to stand up and turn around and look, boom, at the light. And so what he says is that when he stands up, would his eyes not be too dazzled and hurt and pained? And as he is turned around, because, you know, somebody came down into this cave, freed him, had him to stand up, turn around, look at that fire. Now, if somebody were to ask him at that moment, look back at the wall over there, now look at what we call the fire. He imagines that the person would still find the images, the shadows, to be truer than he would the actual objects that he can now see. Because let's imagine this for a minute. Let's imagine there, you know how at a kid's party or something, imagine they've got like a projector that's shining a light, and then you kind of do one of these on the screen, you know, woof, 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 you do that kind of thing. And the light shines, and imagine it looks like a German Shepherd, right? And so if if everybody's been looking at that German Shepherd, you know, on the shadow for their whole lives, and you say turn around, you're standing there with your hand like this, you know, and you say, well, which one looks most real? Well, yeah, the German Shepherd on that shadow is going to look a whole lot more real than the hand thing, you know, that we're making in front of them. All right, so our guy, he stands up. He's now confused. His eyes are burning. All right, but let's suppose he gets used to it. And then the guide, the person who's leading him, then drags him up the rugged ascent that is the escape from the cave. All right, so before that, you know, he didn't even know he was in the cave. And now the person is dragging him up the stairs. It says reluctantly. He doesn't want to go. You know, he's comfortable where he is. But he's literally being dragged out of a cave. And so he says, imagine he gets him out of that cave. Would he not be complaining about how he was being treated as he was being dragged out of that cave? So he gets him outside, and then he says, imagine he holds him then steadfast to the sun. And that now he pushes him and all he can see. Now, how comfortable is that going to be? It's going to burn. And so it does. It burns his eyes, and so he has to look down. And then it kind of cycles back to when he was in the cave. Because if we think about it, when he was in the cave, he was seeing reflections from a fire that eventually burned his eyes. And so now as he is outside, in real reality, outside of the cave, the sun is burning his eyes, but he looks down so that he can once again become acquainted with the shadows and the reflections. So he looks and he sees the shadows that the sun produces. He looks at the water from the lake, and he sees the reflections. And then at nighttime, because he's out of the cave now, so then at nighttime when the sun goes down, he examines things more by the moonlight, now that he can see. And then eventually he's able to see the sun itself. He says he looks up and he's able to see the sun in its own place and not in another. And then he says, and once he does that, he's able to then reason about the sun and contemplate it. And then he reasons that it's the sun that causes the seasons and gives, calls for all the life and all the visible things he sees here on earth. All right, so then, but let's freeze right here in the story though. So now that he's been out of the cave, he realizes what the sun is and does. Let's imagine at this moment, could that realization have been equally possible had our guide snatched him out of the cave and without having him to turn around and get adjusted to the fire, just thrown him out into the sun? Would that have been best? Maybe too much, too soon, Incrementally, our guy is built out of this cave. All right, so then once he comes to this realization, he begins to remember his old dwelling, right, back in the cave. And he starts to think about what the people in the cave are doing. Now remember, the people in the cave, they are hierarching themselves one over the other. And how is it that they are judging who's smartest and who's best? They're doing that based on who can figure out or who can guess when the shadows are going to be coming. Now we call them shadows, they would be calling them the objects, like when's the dog coming, when's that fruit basket girl coming, when's the statue coming by? And so whoever can figure that out. Now let's think about this. That whole charade is being dictated by the jailers, and so our prisoners are really bullying each other, hierarching one another based on the whims of their jailers that they're unaware of. Anyway, okay, so it says then our guy, as he remembers the ignorant, because of course it's a metaphor, at least partially, for ignorance, he remembers the guys down in that cave, and he thinks better to be the poor servant of a poor master than to think after they do and follow their manner, he says. But he feels that it's the task of the enlightened, so to go back down into the cave and bring them out. So he goes down back into the cave, and what happens? Well, let's think about it. If he's been out adjusted to the light, and the cave, we remember, by metaphor, is dark, and the people who are there, their eyes, well, they've never left the cave, so their eyes are adjusted to the dark. When he goes back down into that cave, he's not going to be able to see, and you can imagine he's going to be fumbling and bumbling and falling down. And when he's doing that, the people who he's talking to are going to think he's flatly crazy. Imagine it. Imagine you're sitting down and you can see just fine, and somebody comes stumbling, reaching around like, hey, I've been enlightened, you should do what I did. Well, the folks who are in the cave, they want him to prove himself, of course. And what's the first thing they're going to have him to do when he has to prove himself? They're going to have him to explain which thing is which, if the dog or the fruit basket or the statue is coming by first. Now he won't even be able to see it, and he's going to think it's stupid. Imagine it. He just comes back down to the cave. They say, okay, fine, if you're so smart, is the dog coming next? And then he goes, you mean those shadows over there? This is stupid. That's not even what you think it is. All right. Well, the people who are chained up, they're not going to take kindly. They're not going to feel like they are prisoners and that he's enlightened. They're going to feel like he's crazy, and they need to kill him. In fact, the book says, or the passage says, translation, let them only catch the offender, and they would surely put him to death if he tried to free another. Okay. So this is the essential layout of the allegory of the cave. And we can think about it on many levels. We think about it with regard to education, because I mean that's kind of the context it's set out in. It's also meant to be a demonstration, or should I say, we can say it's a demonstration of Plato's metaphysics as well as his epistemology. So let's break that down. So we remember that metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality. Well, as far as Plato is concerned, reality is divided into two realms: the realm of being and the realm of becoming. The realm of being is the true realm of essences. It is intangible, universal, non-touchable. It's non-spatially, temporally located. It's not in space-time. Whereas in the realm of becoming is the entire world of physicality, or what we would call examples or representations or what have you. So the physical, actual examples of things, well, he imagines that's one realm, becoming. Almost spiritual underlying meanings of things, if you would, well, this is being. So his idea, just to repeat, is that reality is divided into two realms: the realm of essences that gives the true meanings, and then the realm of physical objects that are the representations of those essences. There'll be a lot more talk about that, but just to introduce it, there it is. Now, with regard to the allegory of the cave, we imagine that inside the cave represents the becoming, the material where, where the ignorance is, funny enough. All right. And then outside of the cave represents the being, or the spiritual realm, or the realm where God is, and that kind of thing. Okay. Let's do a flat U-ey. Oh, let's beat this truck. Alright. So, the metaphysics then, in the allegory of the cave, we just said, inside, becoming, outside, being. Now the epistemology of the allegory of the cave. Now remember, epistemology is the study of how humans come to know things. The study of the theory of knowledge, and it asks the general question, how do you know? So there's an idea. Remember in the beginning of this talk when we said that Plato imagines folks need to be able to separate knowledge from opinion. Well, for him, in the realm of being, in the tangible physical realm, this is a land of opinions, because we get opinion through observations. Those observations can be sight, they can be sound, they, smell it, hear it, touch it, any of your senses. And so if it's sensible in that way, then it's an opinion, and it's not, strictly speaking, the truth or knowledge. And so then what he thinks is that other realm, that spirit realm we just discussed, that's the realm where knowledge exists. And you can't go there with your body, you turn your mind's eye there. That's how that works. Alright, so let's go back to the beginning when Aristocles changes his name to Plato. And Plato wants to teach people how to divide knowledge from opinion. He wants to teach them how to have a just state. And to figure that out, he's got to tell them how reality is set up. So in the allegory of the cave, we have a starting point for all those conversations. How do you separate knowledge from opinion? You know that opinion is going to be in this visible world of change, and so we'll talk more about that, but those are going to be the opinions. Through deep reasoning and turning in with the mind's eye, we can look towards the realm of the forms, or the realm of being, and that's where he thinks that knowledge is. So I'll give you one breakdown about that. But just real quick, just the overview. So from the allegory of the cave, we have a point to talk about Plato's metaphysics, like how reality is made up, and we have a way to talk about Plato's epistemology, which is how we come to know things, or how we ascend to knowledge from opinion.